Good afternoon. This is Melissa Samuels. I'm the Director of Alumni Programs at the UAlbany Alumni Association. Glad you could join us today for top strategies for a successful job search. Before we get going, I would like to go over just a couple of housekeeping items. We will be recording this webinar, so you will have access to it in the next couple of days. I'll send an email with a link to you. We'll also be doing a Q&A today, so we'll keep probably the last 10-15 minutes aside for you to ask Alison your questions. Please post any questions you have in the Q&A tab, not in the chat tab, because I might miss them there, but we'll definitely get to the ones, as many as we can, in the Q&A tab. So let me share a little bit of information about our speaker today. Alison Johnson is the owner of Hudson River Career Resources, which has been delivering a unique blend of services for both employers and job seekers since 2003. Applying 25 years of experience in consulting and corporate HR roles, Alison successfully identifies and connects talent with organizations and helps position individuals for success in the job market. Alison, thank you so much for being with us today. I know we've got a lot of folks that are really looking forward to hearing some insights from you today. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll turn it over to you.
So first of all, thank you for inviting me and for including me in this panel. I think it's hopefully going to be very helpful as we enter 2021. So welcome to everybody. It's also really helpful to see in the chat on the side some of the majors and degrees that people are working on or have completed. So that's really appreciated as well. So I'm just going to try and share my screen here, and hopefully I can bear with me. Okay, so let's get into slideshow mode. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see the slides pretty clearly. So there's a lot of information in here. And what I think is important to note is all the topics that I want to cover are, and this is not, bear with me because it's not sharing. There we go. There are so many topics in here. We are always limited on time. So what I was hoping to do is to show everybody some of the strategies and things that will help you prepare for your job search, not just from a recruiting perspective, but also from a consulting perspective, because I work directly with job seekers on their strategies. So I think being able to see both points of view will benefit each of you. So we're going to cover briefly the market. The statistics change every single day. There's something new unemployment rates, new trends. So I'm just going to touch on a few things. Talking about integrity and honesty in your search, I have first and foremost, because I think that is the foundation of everybody's career search. And we'll get into that a bit. Creating a search strategy, so a really practical tool that you can use, or a set of tools. And I'm going to touch just briefly on resume and cover letter highlights. I believe that most of you have probably read plenty of articles, met with individuals, and have been interviewed, and have a good feel for the basics. So I want to just look at that from maybe a slightly higher level, and also share with you what recruiters are actually discussing behind the scenes, so you can kind of get the inside scoop. I also want to share with you some of the questions that I've been hearing from my candidates most recently. I've been trying to gather some of the questions over the past couple of weeks that I've been hearing. And I think also equally important to everything is using technology with your search. For some of you who may not have looked for a position in a while, the technology is moving so quickly with regard to applicant tracking systems and social media and so forth, that I want you to stay on top of how to use it effectively and to your benefit. And then a little bit on interview prep and follow-up. Okay, so we have a couple of poll questions that'll just sort of give me a sense of who's here and what some of the questions are. And I believe that Melissa is going to field those questions. Oh, this is great how this poll works. Look at that. Okay. All right, so it looks like about over half of the attendees right now are actively looking, and then 55%, 33% are thinking about it, and then 12% others. So this might just be, strictly informational right now. So that's really helpful. Okay, so that gives me a good starting point. Okay, so here are a couple of just quick stats about the market right now. For those of you who are joining us from the New York City area, I thought it would be important to share this statistic that as of December, 11.14% was the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate, whereas for the whole state, it's 8.2. So the reason I wrote that everything balances out is because I really firmly believe that there's so many variables and so many shifts in the market every day that you'll hear about trends, but really, I think ultimately there ends up being a balance, and there are always going to be, people looking and thinking about looking, which is what the poll sort of backed up. So right now, 8 in 10 job candidates, both active and passive, those of you who are actively looking for a job, and again, those are either maybe just thinking about it or would entertain an opportunity if it were presented to you. 80% foresee working for a new company in the next 12 months. Now that seems high, and it also to me sounds a little bit counterintuitive because there are so many other statistics out there that are sort of demonstrating that people are staying put. So that's why in red I wrote, despite or possibly due to economic uncertainty caused by the coronavirus. And I do not want to weight this presentation heavily on COVID because I think we're all exhausted by it. I want to help all of you move forward instead of feeling stagnant and sort of trapped by everything that is surrounding COVID right now. A recent ZipRecruiter survey stated that 48% of job seekers are more likely to apply to a job when employers issue a statement of commitment to diversity and inclusion. I think that's also really important because that's just at the forefront of so much in our world right now. And it definitely has an impact on hiring and recruitment strategy actually right now. So to reinforce that, here's a fact for those of you who are Office fans. 8 in 10 job candidates, active and passive, foresee working for a new company in the next 12 months. So here's what I think is really important to share with all of you is that as a recruiter, I truly believe that the integrity and honesty element of your search, and by search, I mean the planning, not just the active interviewing. I mean, the thoughtfulness that goes into deciding what direction you want to take, I think will come through every single time. When I interview, I definitely get a feel for who's really being true to who they are on a professional level. And it takes time to sift it out. You're not just a light switch is not going to go on one day and you decide that this is the career path for you. Everybody takes different directions all the time. But what's important is to respect yourself, what you do, and what you can bring to the table. And remember that because your education, your experience, who you are, that all has value. So that's what you always want to be able to demonstrate. Because wherever you go, you're going to be spending probably 40 hours plus a week doing it. So I want you to be happy. And those are two qualities that are ranked among the qualities that employers do look for during an interview. And it always comes through, I guarantee you. And so one thing during this presentation, I love giving examples and little anecdotes. I'm also trying to be cognizant of time. But I think the more stories I can share, the more examples I can share, it'll show you that, the thoughts that you're having and the questions you may have are happening all over the place. So all questions are relevant. All questions are important when it's your search because this is your profession. Also, figure out your motivators. What is most important to you when you're considering your next position, or what direction you want to take professionally. It may not be an in-house position. Maybe you want to start your own business. Maybe you want to be a consultant. Maybe you want to be part-time. There are 100 different options out there in how you formulate what you're going to do. And ultimately, you have to do what's best for yourself. So with regard to your resume, can you back up every statement in your resume? And I am a very, very tough interviewer. I will challenge you on every word in your resume because I want you to be confident with what you're saying. I want to hear your examples. I want to hear your story. So as you read through your resume, look at every single bullet and say, can I really talk about this? One thing I see is with technical skills, people will list, let's say, that they work with Excel. And if I were to talk to somebody about working with Excel, I'll ask maybe a couple of quick questions and people say, well, I took a class, I've seen the spreadsheet, that doesn't count. So take that right off the resume. So things like that, you really want to have, a good discussion about whatever you're writing. And it's not just the skill sets, it's about who you are. Your applications, when you are filling out the formal application, whether it's online or an actual hard copy resume or a application, remember that that's a legally binding document and you can be dismissed from a position if they find that they don't align. So every time you fill out an online application, make sure it's really aligning with everything in your resume, right down to the dates and to the date of your education. And if for some reason you needed to include your GPA, all those details need to be, just letter perfect. As I mentioned earlier, interviews, be true to yourself, be sincere with others, and that will shine through every single time. Something else to note is, right now, especially because there is so much economic uncertainty and so much fluctuation in the market, sometimes people need to take positions if they're not working just to pay the bills. And they know that it's not going to be a long-term fix for them. Just be really careful if you choose this path. It actually can turn into something pretty great in a lot of cases because something you didn't anticipate being such a good fit for you could end up being that. So, just think carefully because you want to look at the opportunity for yourself down the road, not just a quick fill to fill in the gaps in a resume. Okay, so we have another poll question, which I think Melissa will put out there. There we go. What are some of the job search challenges you face? Okay, so I don't know if everybody can see the results on the screen or not. So in case you can't, it looks like that out of all of the choices, 21% of the responses, a concern is having no connections, followed up by not being able to beat the applicant tracking systems, which we will definitely talk about, having no clear plan of attack. So what we're going to get into next is just how to develop that strategy. And so it's going to tackle all these. And then actually skipping the cover letter, everybody voted almost everything here. So I think everything we'll touch upon in the next half hour or so, or however much time we've got. So, okay. So leading right into that is about the strategy. So those of you who answered, I don't have a clear plan of attack, here's your plan of attack or a partial one. It goes across a couple of slides. I can send all this information to you afterwards if I think the slides will be possibly available, but I'm happy to share this information with you. So don't feel that you need to be fast and furious taking notes because I will get it to you. Geography obviously is a first concern for a lot of people. Some people want to relocate, some don't. If you are in the New York City metro area, you also have to think about commute time. So people may say New York City, but they can only go at, the mileage and the commute time, varies differently than it does upstate, for example. Industry options is something to consider. I'll mention that in a little bit, but keep in mind that industry and what you do they don't always go hand in hand. So if you are an accountant, for example, whether you're an accountant in manufacturing or an accountant in a software development firm, your skills are still transferable. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, with the exception of some companies, in manufacturing may want somebody who understands cost of goods sold and understands the operations management piece of it a little bit differently. But generally, don't limit yourself by industry unless your background is specifically bound to that industry. Again, think about your motivators. What is most important to you? Because that is definitely going to gear your search and what companies you choose to apply for. And your career goals. One thing I learned way back is not everybody has to be executive leadership. There's a spot for everybody in every organization. Some people do not want to be at the management level. Some people want to be more analytical. Some people want to be hands-on. Some people want to be behind the scenes. Some individuals love being in the forefront and out and about. So those are all elements that kind of wrap into your career search and helps you determine what route you're going to take. So all of this really lumps into the strategy. The types of positions, using your keywords, don't ever rely on an exact title, because an analyst in one company means something totally different in another. So that's where the creativity is really going to come into play when you're online and running some of your keyword searches. So the online element of your search, you can post your resume and you can search for jobs. One tends to be a little bit more active than the other. There's sort of that post and wait mentality that job seekers take and recruiters take. Some of us will, as recruiters, will post a job and we'll just sit and we'll wait for the applicants to come in, and we'll keep checking our email and seeing who applies. That is not really efficient, in my opinion, at all. The same way for a professional, just posting your resume on Indeed, for example, or one of the major websites or an industry site or wherever it may be, and just waiting for somebody to show interest is not going to get you anywhere. The strategy has to be pretty broad, pretty creative. I recommend going out and actually searching for the job and going back to those keywords and thinking about what you want to go after so you can target the job. The job does not have to just come to you. And I think that's a big distinction in how some people conduct their searches. So, it also gives you an opportunity to check out jobs that you may never have thought of before. And it's surprising how many really interesting opportunities pop up just by getting creative and seeing what's out there. So you can use the general career websites. Indeed is probably number one at the moment in terms of popularity. It sort of pulls a lot of postings from other sites in. Recruiters pay to post their jobs. We can go in and search for resumes based on the keywords that we think we need. But there's a lot out there. So it's just a huge repository. It's a little bit tough to manage sometimes from a recruiter perspective. You also need to manage it as well if you have a login or an account with any of the sites. Sometimes if you do have a very specific industry or skill set, you may want to go to an industry specific site. So if you are in biotech, for example, there are sites devoted to that profession. And a lot of times that's where you should be going first. A lot of those jobs are national, a lot more jobs are remote. Some, may require somebody to be in a lab, so maybe it is an on-site job, but you read through and you decide, what am I going to apply for? You can't apply for everything. You'll drive yourself nuts. That's why you really just be selective. And again, that goes back to being true to yourself. Don't just apply for anything and everything. Using LinkedIn, that could be an entire workshop in itself because there's so much to it, but use it. If you're not on it, get on it, update your groups, reconnect with people, make new connections, connect with me. You can, and I always say my LinkedIn contacts are your LinkedIn contacts. So use them. That's the whole purpose of it. It is not a job board. Although there is the job posting element to it, that's your opportunity to network. So for some of you who in the poll earlier said, I don't have any connections, this is one way, especially when we don't have the benefit of going out and being at face-to-face networking events. This is your opportunity to start connecting with colleagues, alumni, whoever it may be, recruiters. There's so much in there. And as you search, be very careful, because what happens is you go onto LinkedIn, you start researching, and there's so much in there, and you come up and you look at your watch and you realize it's lunchtime. And you have no idea where the past 3 hours went, because you went right down the rabbit hole and you don't know where you're going to come up and you can't find your way back. So be cognizant of your time as well when you're online. And I would honestly set a timer, get up, take a break, walk away from it, come back, because it can get overwhelming sometimes. And the use of all their social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. A lot of companies have that social media presence. It depends on how much you want to use it. It does not mean that if you choose not to use social media that you're not going to find that gem of a position there. That's why that strategy is brought, to give you options. And do your research on every company. If there is a company that you are interested in, go right to their website. for the most part, companies are keeping their websites pretty up to date with all of their job postings. So if you happen to see a job for company ABC, and it sounds interesting, but not quite a good fit, but the company itself sounds great, go right to their website, see what else is there. You might find something that's an even better fit for you. And I love going and doing the research on the companies because it's important to do that to prep for an interview anyway. And you want to apply for a company with a company that has the same values and you understand their mission and what they're doing and who their leadership team is, all the little pieces in between. Other elements of your strategy, the networking. And I know that some of you say, I don't even know where to begin. Everything on this list really will help you network in one way or another. Volunteering, if you have the time, is a great way to build your network. You just don't know who is sitting on a board with you or volunteering at an event with you, or if you're coaching a team, who are some of the kids' parents on the team. You just don't know. And I hear stories like this all the time. I know somebody who is interviewing right now, and he was made aware of the job exactly that way through a parent on a team that he had been coaching, who he has stayed in touch with. So there's an awful lot of opportunity there. Using, University at Albany, the Alumni Network, and if you go on LinkedIn, you can see, if you go and research a company, it will say X number of employees also went to UAlbany. That's a great starting point. So it's sort of that soft introduction for you to talk with people. Publications and resources, use of recruiters and headhunters. We can also talk about that. Attending job fairs. Okay, job fairs are not really happening. They're virtual right now, but there's still a huge benefit to them. It at very least gives you an opportunity to check out companies that sound interesting without having to go through and stand in lines at job fairs in the traditional sense. If you are unemployed at the moment, use the unemployment office, Department of Labor, your workforce development office. They have awesome resources, and not just online resources. They have connections for you. They work within their markets. Upstate here, Columbia Green Community College, I love their workforce development office. Because of their geographic area, they have great connections with employers. They have training. They give you use of their computers, their offices, their paper, printers, everything. And that's what a lot of them do. So take advantage of that because it's free. Making sure that, part of your strategy is also the actual interaction, the thank you notes, your follow-up, and having a solid reference list. When you put together a reference list, make sure you have a mix. They always say, oh, we want 3 supervisory references. That's great. If you're at the management level, I would recommend also having somebody who reported to you and maybe a peer, or if you are in sales or an outward facing position, one of your vendors or a customer, that also, because it kind of balances out and it gives us sort of a 360 of the people that you're dealing with. And then goals and tracking. Make sure you're tracking your results in some way. You don't have to put together something really crazy, but it's just, if it's a pen and paper or if it's an Excel spreadsheet, just so you can go back and flag certain items for follow-up. Are there any, I don't know, I hate to insert questions necessarily because we have time at the end, but I'm trying to sort of take a peek at the chat as well. Lack of information from the employer once I apply. Whoever just posted that will cover that. Okay, so a couple of resume highlights. Keep one version. And somebody earlier had said, a concern about having multiple versions. Sometimes if you're in academia, sometimes people do have 2 versions. They'll have that CV and then more of a traditional resume. Why? Because it creates way too much work for you. The job search is enough work. If you are constantly tailoring your resume, you're just going to keep recreating the wheel. You don't need to do that. If you're being true to who you are, your resume should sort of capture everything about you, and you should feel confident giving it to any company. And yes, somebody may say, well, can you shift some of the bullets around because we want to highlight your training capabilities at the top of the list of bullets, so forth. Yeah, that's fine, but don't start recreating it every time. It's not going to get you anywhere. A lot of people ask me professional profile or a summary versus an objective. A profile or summary, 4 sentences or so. This is who I am as a professional. This is what makes me different than everybody else. So it is not that I am really organized or have great communication skills. I'm very determined. That's all great, but everybody, I guarantee, is going to say that. Think about really what has made you successful in your past jobs, and that's your profile. So if somebody doesn't read your cover letter and the only thing they have is a resume, that one bit at the top will want them to hopefully keep reading. It covers who you are. Everything else in the resume is really just the backup and the proof of what you've done and who you are. An objective is I'm seeking a position, that applies my great communication skills. That's lovely, but again, that's not differentiating you. I personally prefer the summary, and you can maybe wrap it up with one sentence that you would welcome an opportunity, da, 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 da. But it's always about what you can do for the employer. What I mentioned earlier, focus on your transferable skills, not just on the industry, and really focus on your relevant accomplishments. That resume should not be a laundry list of every single task that you have. We can read between the lines, especially as you build your career. There's information that's just going to have to drop off. You can't have everything in there. Focus on the most relevant accomplishments, the ones, the real highlights, rather than every single list. And when I write resumes for people, they say, well, I also worked on this project and it was really great. It was really great. And there are 10 really great things or really good things, but you have to pick and choose what really has the biggest impact. You can leave time in your interview to talk about the rest. Also avoid company acronyms. I find this a lot up here. Individuals who have worked with GE, they have so many internal acronyms and internal language, and then it ends up on the resume. And when a recruiter is reading it, we don't understand all of it. And there isn't time for you to have to explain. So put it in terms that might appeal to a broader audience. A couple of other highlights, basics, but real quick, the formatting. Try to avoid tables. It gets a little bit messy in translation, even if you're saving to a PDF. Just simple is better, not too many columns and margins and things going on. Be very consistent with your headers, your bullets, your margins, your dates. Go through it line by line. Some people like to read from the bottom up, just to read it a little bit differently, but make sure that everything is just, the same throughout. Always have a PDF version, a Word version, and now Google Docs. As the technology changes, companies are requesting different formats. PDF typically is the safest because the formatting can't get mangled as you send it off, or if it goes into an applicant tracking system. The length, yes, 2 pages is just fine. I get this question once a week, 1 page or 2 pages. 2 pages, it's okay. Don't go beyond 2 pages, and do not try to pack it in so your margins are like 0.25 and 2 pages of full text, because it is immediately overwhelming. Have some white space. Again, if you focus really on the highest level accomplishments and what really has the most impact, you'll have plenty of space. It takes time. It's always a work in progress, but even mine, I'm always just refining it periodically just to have it. And it's amazing how much you can always change even over the course of weeks, but don't hang on it too much. What to avoid? Too much personal information, salary information, and then some of the deal breakers, the typos, the grammatical errors, and untruthful statements. I just want to take a quick peek at the questions just in case. Gone to interviews and they've never provided a response. I sent them thank you notes and one friendly follow-up. At what point do you stop following up? Which is a great question, and I will definitely cover that. Hold on. Okay, I have to try and minimize the chat. Okay. So what else are recruiters and hiring managers discussing right now? A big thing is the timing. This is a new year. Budgets are going into place. Companies are assessing their headcount from last year. We had open positions, but because of COVID, we put things on hold and we furloughed and we laid off and we reorganized. So there's a lot of assessment right now, but I will tell you the positions are open. I have, right now I have I have 4 very active searches, and we're getting far into the process, and it's happening. They haven't been on hold. It might have slowed down a bit, but there are jobs out there. But timing really is everything. Be patient with the process. I know how frustrating it can be. I hear it again all the time from my candidates. They follow up. I follow up. Sometimes my clients drop out of sight completely for weeks, and they've been busy. It's budget time. We have a crisis. We have so there's all kinds of things happening. So the follow up is good, and I'll answer that question as well in a few moments. We're also discussing cover letters. There's one group I'm in on LinkedIn, and there's been this crazy discussion about cover letters, and there are 2 different camps. Yes, you should have a cover letter, and no, that's ridiculous. It's a total waste of time. Bottom line, if a company asks for a cover letter, then you write the cover letter. And to me, a cover letter is a writing sample. It complements your resume. It is not repeating everything, and it is tailored to that job. So I like seeing the cover letters. The other side says, well, it's a total waste of time. You know, we're never going to read them. What's most important is the interview. And some people think that resumes are obsolete as well. Maybe someday, but right now, no. And that's my opinion. But I think a cover letter can be incredibly valuable. So one example, several years ago, I had a search for a director of education with a professional association. And I had, we'd already conducted several interviews with my client, and we're pretty far into the process. And then an email came through, a resume with a cover letter. And that cover letter was so energetic and so sincere, and you could tell that she just loved what she did. I basically dropped everything, picked up the phone. I didn't even bother with an email, just picked up the phone and called her. And she's the one who ended up getting the job. So cover letters definitely can have impact. Take your time with it. Once you have one written, a lot of them, again, don't recreate the wheel, like having multiple versions of your resume. I'm not saying the cover letter should be standard. It should not. But once you have sort of a framework, you can work from that and go back and use it again. Another thing we're discussing, compensation. The goal really is to be fair, not to get the cheapest candidate. And some people will say, well, it's too expensive, I didn't get it. Yes, you might price yourself out if you say, this is my salary is X, and the company has a range that is Y. But HR professionals understand the value of their talent. And that's the biggest asset to any company is your employee base. So we want to retain you as an employee. We want you to build your career. We want to be as fair as possible. And that's often why there are ranges. It's not just one set number ever. Also determining who is a fit, and that will get into the interview. The resume, again, is a lot of that is the backup. It's who's a fit for our company culture, and especially the not-for-profits, somebody who understands our mission and our vision. And that's a lot of what we interview for. We're also talking about, okay, let's look at our internal candidates. Before we go outside, is there somebody who we can offer an opportunity to promote? So, and I'll touch on this in a few moments as well. If you think that there's an opportunity for you in your company, you also need to raise your hand. Do not wait for somebody to come to you. Go to HR, go to your manager, whatever you need to do to sort of raise your hand and take the initiative. We're looking at the sourcing and labor market trends, especially right now, because things are, just a little bit crazy and we're hearing different things all over the place. Diversity and inclusion, another, again, big trend right now. That's a big push in the recruitment and talent acquisition world. Let's see if there are any other questions coming up yet. Not yet. Okay. So this is one of the big questions that everybody has. I want to keep an eye on the time as well. Time flies. I can't, this is going way too fast. So applicant tracking systems and the use of technology with your job search, stay on it. There's so much opportunity, in my opinion, to almost slip up because everything is so fast moving. 75% of online applications are weeded out through technology right now. And that's the source, that was a statistic I found on LinkedIn, and it's true. And companies, especially the large companies, are using applicant tracking systems. the resumes feed in as you apply online. It goes right into their portal. It's sorted. It integrates with other technology and on their platforms and allows for follow-up and searching and so forth. They can be really, really robust. And even a recruiter or an in-house HR, we can get lost in our own systems. So that's where the follow-up is really important on behalf of a candidate, I think. So they're saying 98% of major companies use some form of an ATS. I absolutely agree with that. Even if it's in the very basic off-the-shelf package, they're out there. And they're great overall. I mean, it really helps us stay organized. And it also helps us comply with HR and employment law. But how do you get past it? And that was a question that somebody, I think in the poll, a bunch of people were questioning that. So the keywords, really a lot of times, if I go into my applicant tracking system and I'm looking for somebody who has experience in a lab setting and needs very specific experience, I'll put in the keywords that I know that my client needs. And hopefully your resume will come up in that search. If you're being true to yourself and you have the right keywords, they're already going to be there because you're talking about what you really know, what you do, and it will come up. So the keywords, that's a big thing. It's all about the intelligence behind the scenes that you don't see. And again, there's also that personal connection, regardless of the technology, being able to, if you have a contact, follow up. If you have a referral or somebody you know in that company, even if you have to apply through the proper chain of command. And I always recommend, even if you know somebody, if that company posting says, please apply via our portal, click here to apply, then do it. Follow their application process to the letter. Because if you can't follow that instruction, then what's going to happen in the job? So that's sort of almost like a first impression in some cases. And statistically, I read 1 in 10, it gives you more to a 1 in 3 chance of at least getting an interview if somebody can put in a good word. So go through the proper channels, then pick up the phone and call your contact and say, hey, I just applied for the director of finance position. Do you have a contact or somebody you can check in with or whatever you need to do? So those personal connections, wherever possible as a follow-up or giving you another lead internally, will definitely help you get past that ATS. But you have to have those connections first. So that's sort of a precursor to that approach. So the company website forms or templates, you can get tangled in them. Some of the large applicant tracking systems will require you to have a login and a password, and then you apply with company A. And then a week later, you apply for a position with company B, and it says login and password, and you're like, this format looks familiar. They could be using the exact same ATS, and you already have an applicant, a login and a password. So I would actually just keep a little login and password sheet of paper or something for everything related to your job search, because all that information, some of it will already actually be populated in some of the larger sites. When it asks you to upload your resume, and then you see, oh, look at that, it populated all the fields for me. Isn't that great? This happens on Monster, if any of you are using Monster. And you're like, wow, that's just saved me a lot of time. It not necessarily. Go through with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that they put the right fields in the right places, or the right information to the right fields. Because once you hit send, then it's out there. And then you have to go back and you realize that your jobs are out of order because it didn't pick up everything correctly. So just be very careful and thoughtful about it. Don't rush through it. So the career websites, some of them do that. Always check everything you do before you upload or enter your information. If you get nothing else out of this entire webinar, using your phone for your job search, with the exception of maybe replying to a quick message, please don't use your phone to apply for a job. Every time I receive a resume or an application that somebody tried to do on their phone with a tiny little, keyboard, and you've got your reading glasses up and down, and there's so much room for error, and I can tell every single time. And a lot of times it'll say sent from my iPhone, and then I know that somebody was trying to apply So just take the time, step back for a couple of hours. Once you're sitting down in front of your laptop or your iPad, even that I find iffy, then do your work and apply. I guarantee it will make a difference, and it'll make you feel better seeing everything on the screen and knowing that you don't have any typos. Voicemail, make sure your voicemail is set up. So when companies call you back, they're actually getting a real voicemail and they're not questioning, is this the right person? The same thing for texting. Just be really careful if you're having some kind of a texting conversation, which I sometimes do with my candidates because somehow it filters through to my personal line, which is sort of somehow tangled. Half the time I don't even know who's texting me. So be really careful about that. Just reintroduce yourself if you're ever sending a text. Those resume formats, as I mentioned, have the PDF, a Word document, Google Docs, just to make sure that you're submitting in the proper format. Track your activity. You can do that online. For those of you who are in maybe the design world, the graphic design or something more creative, having an online portfolio, or even if you're a writer, if you're in the communications field, or even in the marketing field, an online portfolio is definitely the trend right now. It gives quick access. We can see all your work. Old school, we used to all people walk in with these big portfolios and get really creative. Now everything is online. I had somebody when I was in corporate HR who, and this was during a very sensitive time in the world where we were very concerned about security, and a marketing manager decided to get very creative with how he applied. And he left for me at a reception desk a big metal briefcase with my name on it. And so we had to have our security team, we didn't know what it was. It turned out, if you opened it up, it was one of those foam lined with the little cutouts. There was a DVD and the resume all bound in a bunch of different things, trying to be creative, that's how he can present himself, which, yes, is super creative, but not a lot of common sense behind that one. So be mindful of what you're doing and how you're applying and how creative you want to get and what you're sharing, the content of what you're sharing, make sure it's appropriate. Social media, again, we've talked about this, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all trends. Companies are using them to stay in touch with their candidates, particularly in the nursing profession, because nurses are so hard to find. The nurse staffing agencies are out there on Twitter and texting, doing group texts out to their candidate, pushing out to their candidates to let them know of new opportunities. So it's definitely being utilized. So what I want to do is just quickly run through a little bit behind. These are some of the actual questions that I've received from candidates. I'm going to actually skip over this because I would rather leave time for your actual questions, but I just want to give you an idea, if you want to take a quick scan through these, that these are actual questions. Your peers have all of the same questions that you might have. A big one, I don't love my job, but I have a great comp package and a pension, but I just can't do this much longer. I can't walk into that office another day. I hear that an awful lot. Or I'm scared to make a move to a new industry because I have obligations and I don't want to take the risk. So, risk is definitely an element with the job search. But I want to make sure I just touch on these couple of slides because some of you did have specific questions. The virtual interview, be prepared, Zoom, Skype, whatever it may be, prepare ahead of time. Dress code, even if you think, oh, well, this company is totally business casual, so I'll be business casual, don't be business casual. Elevate everything. Make sure that you are really, that dress for success. Show that you're taking this seriously. If they very specifically say, please show up in, a polo, oh, okay, but I'm still iffy. I had an executive who had to interview, this was years ago in corporate HR, and his final interview was on a Saturday when all the executives came in their golf shirts and jeans. And they said, please tell him to come in casual because we'll all be casual. He still came in dressed in a suit. And here's where it gets, tricky, because he still said, I'm interviewing for an executive level position. I still want to put my best foot forward. And then the executives came to me afterwards. They said, Alison, we told you to tell him to come in a golf shirt. Well, I can't control what he ultimately wears, but I see where he was coming from, that he still wanted to be presentable. They wanted to see that he was relatable also at that point in the interview process. So, use your discretion. The technology, make sure audio, video, what's in your background, look at your space. You know, put the dog in another room, you know, kids in front of the TV if you have to, whatever you have to do just to give your space, so it can be dedicated and you don't have any distractions. So when you're interviewing, you do not always know who will be on that interview panel. You may be told, well, it'll just be me and maybe one other person, and then 3 people show up. So you could be surprised who's there with you. Ask ahead of time. Do your research on anybody you know will be on the interview so you can be prepared to have some thoughtful questions. The process is about eliminating the candidates. That's the first round. Let's flush out who we don't think will be the right fit. So don't make it easy for them. You know, you don't want to oversell and be pushy. You want to, that's where be yourself. If you are yourself, you will be a fit for that organization if it's a common match. And the egg timer approach, also remember that you have, just like I have an hour for this presentation, you have an hour for your interview potentially. Make sure you are cognizant of time, that you have your answers prepared and you know what you want to highlight when you're having a discussion. You don't know what direction the interview will take, but make sure you're giving clarity to the resume, and that's where it goes back to being able to back up every single statement. This is not the time for you to stumble. And make sure you write a thank you note afterwards. Stay in touch. The engagement, it's 2 ways. The employer should definitely be following up with you. So the waiting is the hardest part of this whole thing. What happened to my resume? As I mentioned before, the timing, the process. I have a client now, I didn't hear from them for weeks because they had an internal crisis, and then they went into budget, and then it was the holiday, and then they were quarantined. So 100 different things. Yes, absolutely, an employer should be following up. If you are in the active candidate pool, especially if you've interviewed, you should get some type of an acknowledgement. I absolutely agree. So I recommend give it 2 weeks, then follow up. If you followed up, if you had to apply through jobs@companyabc.com, then, and you don't have a contact, use that same email address to follow up. If you can pick up the phone, if you can get, especially if you're in a role that requires some creativity or resourcefulness and research, go on LinkedIn, see if you can find somebody in HR who you can message through LinkedIn or get their email address or phone number and contact them. And don't blame yourself in saying, well, what if I had a typo in my resume and they eliminated it? Or what if, you'll drive yourself nuts. Keep the pipeline going. Make a goal. That's where the goals come in. Make a goal for yourself that you want to apply for X number of jobs. You don't have to canvas. If you can't find 5 jobs to apply for that really are piquing your interest, then don't, because you can't be everything to everybody. Offers and counteroffers. In the interest of time, I'm going to allow people to ask questions about this, but I can always talk to anybody offline if you have specific questions about this. I just want to leave room. Okay, so questions.
Okay.
That was a lot.
Thanks. That was a lot. Take a deep breath and I'll read some questions. We do have a number of questions in the Q&A. We also had some folks post them in the chat, which I tried to find.
Yeah.
As Alison said, she is very kindly offered, if we don't get to your question during this Q&A session, I'll be sharing Alison's contact information with you, and she's willing to kind of respond one-on-one to anything we don't miss. So we'll get to as much.
There's so many.
Okay.
I can also, Melissa, if we don't get through all of these, if there's a way for you to, I think you can do like a transcript. If you want, I can also try to answer some of them offline, and then if you send, I can write up the answers and send them out.
That would be great.
We don't get to all, but I'd love to
be answered one way or the other. But okay. So one of the early questions we had was, should gaps in employment be addressed in a cover letter?
Yes, it's absolutely fine. It's a great place to do so. And a lot of times, how I might phrase it is, let's say you were out of the workforce for several years for whatever reason, or you've had a lot of short-term positions. You don't want to go through and give a laundry list of why you've left each position, but you could say for various reasons, I've had to step out of the workforce for a bit, or my position was eliminated. So a lot of times that's what I'm finding right now. And I would almost introduce that in the first paragraph of the cover letter and say, I had a great experience with my last company. Unfortunately, they went through downsizing and my position was eliminated. I now found myself seeking new employment. Try to fill that gap with something, volunteering, anything, just to keep yourself active, and it'll keep you out there and networking too.
Here's another question, kind of related, but different. When filling out an application, is it preferable to include all past experience or only the most relevant experience, even if it leaves a gap?
A great question.
Hmm.
So the actual applications, whether they're online or in paper form, typically say your most recent 3 positions. So a lot of people say, well, I had a temp position and I, just to fill the gap, but it doesn't really count as the experience I had prior, which is more relevant. I would maybe actually just try to squeeze it in, or because again, you want that application really to align with your resume. And some people choose not to put very short-term consulting or contract work on their resume. Excuse me. But it does account for the gap. But the really short-term ones, sometimes you can get away with it, but legally, any place where you are employed, you need to go right back, because if a company does a background check and an employment check, it will go right through every single place where you are on a payroll. So I would be very consistent.
Okay, here's another question from Jennifer. How do you protect against ageism in your resume? That's
Well,
something we can do.
It's a huge concern for a lot of people right now. So obviously we all know that it's illegal to make any kind of a decision based on age, and a whole host of other factors. First of all, the sort of the trend now is you don't need to go back more than 10 or 12 years on your resume. I use a lot of discretion in that respect, because if you have been with the same company, let's say you worked somewhere for 15 years and now you've worked for your current company for 5, you're not going to chop it off. You'll show the whole tenure, even if it goes back further. There's no real cutoff point. But I would say if you're going back maybe, more than that, 10, 15 years, things can start dropping off. Also in the interest of space. If you are keeping yourself to 2 pages, you can't go back anyway, too much farther. So
Sure.
I would try to stick to that 10 to 15 year rule, unless your tenure again takes you back even farther, and take off the dates of education. If a company application may ask when you graduated, people may make assumptions in an interview, which is wrong. And frankly, I think there's a lot to say for a population that has more experience, because there's, people say, oh, they want somebody younger. Not necessarily. I want somebody who understands the landscape of our company and understands what we do and knows how to lead. So there's a lot going for, a totally different age group. And again, that's a whole other discussion we could have.
Right.
That touches on.
Okay, great. Let's get to another one. I've gone on interviews and they've never provided a response whether I got the job. I sent them thank you notes and one friendly follow-up. At what point do I stop following up?
I would say, give it 3 follow-ups and space it out a little bit. Also, if you're able to, if you have had a first interview, ask, what's the timeline? And when would you like me maybe to follow up if I don't hear from you? Or when do you plan on making a decision? How is the process moving? Just try and gauge it in some way when you're walking out of the interview. But if it has been just an application and it's radio silence, unfortunately, a lot of applicants drop through the cracks just because the recruitment process is not tight enough. And the volume is such that it happens. And I know, I have a friend who may actually be on this call who I recall waited and waited and waited. And I believe had a second interview for a great position and just wasn't getting the follow-up. And at some point you have to step back and say, I'm moving on, because it's sort of a reflection sometimes on how they operate. You can't assume that that's the way it is in every department, but use your discretion, step back. And that's why you have to keep the pipeline going, so you're not relying on just one position.
Okay. Here's another question. What are your thoughts about using a CV instead of a two-page resume outside of academia?
I would not. There's time is tight. That's what it comes down to for recruiters. They want to get right to the point. I think CVs are fantastic, particularly in academia, and there's so much you can include. But if you're stepping into, a private sector, for-profit type of environment, there's volume of resumes. You need to get right to the point. It'll be too much to read. There's everything that you don't put in the two-page resume, you can always reference it in a cover letter or in an interview.
Okay. Nicole would like to know, when is the best time to ask an employer if working remote is an option? Or where should I mention that if it's not mentioned in the job listing? I'm currently only looking for remote work. And I would guess that there are a lot of us now who've gotten used to working remotely.
I'm sure. And that, that's the trend right now, and it's not going to change anytime soon. So I think it is absolutely safe to maybe put in your cover letter and if you are absolutely steadfast, there's no option, absolutely remote, then you need to state that, because if they say, well, we need you on site twice a week, and that's our policy, then it may not be a match. And yeah, some companies will say, well, let's take a step back and think about it. Maybe we can make it work. I would just be upfront with that expectation, because it's just so common right now. I think you're better off just being upfront. And that may shift over time.
All right. I know it's a little past one, so but if you're willing to hang out for a couple more, we'll do a couple more, and then, as I said, we'll figure out one way or another to address any questions that didn't get answered. But we had a couple people ask for you to talk a little bit more about the one resume instead of custom tailoring resumes. A couple folks are surprised to hear that. How do you handle an applicant who wants to work in one industry but maybe recent experience was in another? Is it not to an applicant's advantage to customize the resume based on the job posting description? So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and again, I think that's an awesome question. And a lot of people struggle with that right now. And sometimes, once in a while, I question myself too as a resume writer. But I really, really believe that you should be able to work from one resume. And again, sometimes if you're working with an outside recruiter and they see that, certain things might need to be reorganized, that's one thing to say, okay, well, before we send it to our client, we'd like you just to move, again, the training experience up, or the leadership experience, or whatever. So shifting a little bit I'm okay with that. I just don't want people to say, should I send out version A, B, or C? Because if you're doing that, then you're trying to be too much to too many people. That's why the cover letter, I believe, is a complement to your resume. It's able to highlight what's specific to that job. That's the entire point of the cover letter. The resume really is your backup, and that profile at the top is, this is who I am professionally. This is what makes me distinct. So, I mean, if you choose to have multiple versions of your resume, that's great, but I believe it becomes way too much to manage. And then you're saving 4,000 different versions, and you're like, okay, well, which one did I send to the company over there? Because I'm going in for an interview and I want to make sure I bring the right copy. And I just think it just adds a whole other layer that you don't necessarily need. But I am okay with somebody tweaking it as needed.
Yeah, that makes sense in relation to the cover letter being the area where you really can tailor your message. So, all right, let's do one more. I made it to the final round of interviews for a job, then I heard nothing, even after following up. Any insight? Is company ghosting a common thing?
Yep, that's the term right now. And again, in my opinion, as a recruiter, I think if you're at the third interview point, there's absolutely no reason you should not be hearing back. I would like to know, I'm guessing that whoever asked that question has followed up to get the status.
Yes, person indicated they followed up and then still just didn't hear anything.
I really wish I had a good answer, because at that point, I do not think that there is any excuse at all. And I'm sorry you had to experience that after putting so much of your time and effort into the process. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair. And it certainly doesn't, it's a risk to the company in terms of their own branding, really, and how, and the reputation that they're giving it and the initial experience. So on behalf of that company, I'm very sorry that you had to go through that. It's not right.
Okay, and I do see that we do have quite a few more questions that, as Allison said, we will get back to you folks with answers to those
Sure.
questions. And if you have additional questions, I will be sending you an email in the next couple of days with a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as Allison's contact information. If you want to reach out to her, she has graciously agreed to handle some more questions one-on-one.
Yeah, I'm happy
so
to.
thank you all.
Sure.
Allison, thank you so much, really.
Oh, you're welcome.
You can see by the number of questions how really important this is to people, and we really appreciate you as a fellow alumna taking time today to share some of your insights and your experience with the rest of us. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for asking me to participate. So yeah, the offer stands. If anybody needs to, message me with any questions, I will get back. Or if you want to put one list together, however you want to work it is fine.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, everyone, have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Take care.